What's happening?
Oh, not much. How you doing?
Good, good. Well, we
Good.
got something. We got something. Little article we're going to read tonight. You ever just thought about what it was like in churches back when, and you pick the back when, whatever time period you're talking about? Uh, it just seems like we always assume that the way things are, the way things have always been. And
Yeah, I always I've tried going back and like finding what it was like in worship services like during the first, second century. Outside of what we see in the Bible.
well, they didn't have meeting houses back
And
then, did they?
no, they didn't.
Yeah. Rick
But
found an
a lot.
article. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, but a lot of what I find though is um really just and it's pretty just simple stuff. They meet in houses, they sing songs, and they would read from the scripture. Is what I find in a lot of those old first, second century churches.
You know what's kind of ironic to me or funny after reading this article is I hear preachers a lot of times, and it sounds real spiritual, and they'll have a service and they want to have an old time uh, service, but what does old time mean to them 50 years ago? Because I'm sure they're not talking about the type of services we're fixing to read. And so the article we're going to read, and it's a short article, and is what worship was like in Baptist churches in Antebellum, Mississippi. So pre-Civil War, basically the early 1800s, right?
Yeah.
And so when they talk
Yeah.
about having old time worship service, old time this, old time that, I don't think they're talking about this old time, Brother Rick.
No, it seems like old time to a lot of churches is it's almost like Christianity didn't begin until the 1950s.
Right.
And
Right.
anything, no, we don't have any idea what happened before then. And so they say we want to get back to old time religion. They're thinking 1950 type stuff.
Not 1850.
Not 1850, no, not by any
Now,
stretch of the
after
means.
yeah, after we read this, we're probably going to be ostracized by a lot of people just from reading this article of what Baptist worship was like, pre-Civil War in Mississippi.
Uh huh. Yeah, we'll get to one part of the article and they'll be thinking that they were liberal. Maybe
Yeah,
not though.
yeah.
we
I
might
don't
get to
know.
one. I'm saying we might get to that last part of the article, and a lot of our church members might say, "Hey, we need to bring that part back." That's
You're
the
probably talking about the Spittoons, huh?
yeah.
All right, so let me do this, Rick. Let me go ahead and pull this article up. I think I got it big enough on the screen. I can read it from the screen.
Uh-huh.
This is an article by Robert C. Rogers, and I'm assuming he's a Southern Baptist because it's associated with the Mississippi Baptist Convention Board.
Yeah.
So what preaching and spit boxes, what worship was like in Baptist churches of Antebellum, Mississippi. And so let me just start reading a little bit of this. This, again, it's a short article. We'll read a paragraph or two and talk about it. What was it like to worship in a Baptist church in the years before the Civil War? A survey of church minutes from various churches around Mississippi tell the story. Sunday services were commonly referred to as divine worship, divine service, or simply preaching. Many Mississippi Baptist churches in this time only had a preaching service once a month, as their pastor often had to preach to other churches on the other Sundays during the month. And sometimes they had to adjust their schedule to that of the pastor and his other churches. For instance, in 1855, after calling their new pastor, F. I'm saying that right, church in Clark County voted to move their monthly worship. Worship was from the second to fourth Sabbath. Likewise, in 1853, after Bethesda Church in Hinds County called a new pastor, they changed their monthly meeting for the first Sunday to the third Sunday, and we grant him the privilege to preach for us one Sabbath each month. You know, I wonder, Rick, is this not, I understand back then you had more churches than you had pastors. You really got that today. I mean, I think at any time in the BMA Mississippi, there's about 18 plus churches, around 20 that's without a pastor. But, you know, in the Faith Way work, there's a lot of churches that share a pastor.
Yeah.
They have that pastor at that church each Sunday. He'll preach at two churches on Sunday. Usually they're close enough in relation he can drive. That seems like it's a carryover from what we just read here.
Yeah. Is this what they're describing here? Is that this usually what we might know of as circuit riding preachers?
Yeah, I think so. It seems to me like, though, when you mention circuit preachers, that's what it is technically. But I think that was more a designation for the Methodist than it was the Baptist. But it's the same concept. It's the exact same thing. No difference.
I got you.
And so they would just go from one church. You know, he might pastor 4 churches and be at 4 different churches that month. The first Sunday, this church. So they'd have the churches only have preaching either once or twice a month at best, and he would go around preaching at these. I don't know, though. He doesn't go into this. I would assume, maybe I'm wrong, I would assume that they had services on those Sundays that didn't have preaching. They may just have singing and prayer meeting or something like that. I wouldn't think that they would not have any meeting the rest of the month. They would just have the preaching on that one Sunday. I don't know.
You know, it'd be interesting to do a little digging and find that out. You know, there's still some churches I think that kind of have this practice of just meeting once a month. I know when I was younger, back in 18, 19 years old, there was a church right next door to the church I was a member at, and they only met like maybe once a month. I'm not sure what kind of church. I think I want to say it might have been a Primitive Baptist church.
There's a church in Leaf, a church building that there's a Baptist congregation and a Methodist congregation that share the same building, and they rotate. I don't know if it's the Baptists meet the first and second, and the Methodists the third and fourth. I'm not sure how they do it, but it's 2 separate congregations that share the same building. And so that still goes on here. Now, how they handle business meetings and that which relates to the upkeep of the building, if they have a shared business meeting with regard to the church grounds, I don't know, but they still do that. They carry on like that. They have one building and they share it.
Yeah, there's one of our sister churches in Hattiesburg that they do that. They share a church building with another church. It's more predominantly black church, as they share their worship building with. And I think maybe the black church comes and worships first at a certain time, then they come in and worship after that, or maybe the other way around. But like they split up the day. They preach have service the same day, but just kind of share the building like that.
He goes on to say, baptism was generally done in a natural body of water near the church building. For example, Hopewell Church in Lafayette County recorded in their minutes in July of 1857 that after their business conference, they adjourned and repaired to the water to attend the ordinance of baptism. And Sister Sarah Couch was baptized. Bethesda Church in Hinds County constructed an outdoor baptismal pool, a natural spring not far from their meeting house, and built a dressing house at the pool that was 10 by 12 feet. A member also furnished a suit of clothes to wear for baptism. But now, not only was baptism only for believers by immersion, but the landmark movement influenced Baptists to reject, quote unquote, alien immersion by non-Baptists. In 1853, Phoebe, a servant of Francis Martin, wanted to join Bethesda Church in Hinds County. Phoebe had been immersed as a believer by a Methodist minister. The examining committee was satisfied with her Christian walk and recommended that her former baptism be accepted. So I'm not sure what an examining committee is. Must have been a committee they had that prospective members would talk to and get information from them, which is not a bad idea.
That sounds about what it was like. What it was.
They had the wrong recommendation because it says recommended that her former baptism be accepted, but the church rejected the recommendation at their Saturday business meeting. The next day after the Sunday preaching service, Phoebe was accepted as a candidate for baptism, and the congregation repaired to the water, and Phoebe was baptized. Thank God for the landmark movement.
I'm telling you. But yeah, that's I wonder what the examining committee what their thinking was and recommended that. Were they part of were they members of this church, or were they like maybe an outside body?
Well, you have to remember this was in 1853, and so the part of the reason for the landmark movement was the waning, ecclesiological practices of churches during that time. So that movement came along to repair that. So it doesn't surprise me that there would have been churches that were getting into the practice of accepting alien immersions. That's the reason that the landmark movement came along, was to help offset this digression of doctrine among Baptist churches that were, pulpit affiliation, alien immersion, that type of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that they would have accepted it, because it probably in the early 1800s, that sadly was becoming more common. So the landmark movement for a long time in Mississippi, in the southern states at least, helped to correct that. It was really only up until the early 20th century, even up into like 1950, before the Southern Baptists began to, in Mississippi primarily, I'm talking about, began to move away from what they had embraced at one time called the landmark movement and landmark tenets, So, but you see, they're practicing it at this time. They rebaptized this lady, and today I wonder how many Baptist churches would just accept her because she appeared to have been a saved person and was fully immersed. Hey, that's good. Let's go.
Yeah, that's good enough. Yes, I don't know what it would be in Mississippi, but I do know of Baptist churches that do accept these. As long as they were immersed, it doesn't matter what denomination of church did it. I think we've discussed maybe in like an earlier episode of our podcast back a few years ago, Reformed preacher John Piper, the church he was pastoring at, and I think it was Minneapolis, they would accept really any kind of baptism. In fact, I don't even think it hadn't necessarily had to be immersion, but whether or not, but you could be a member, but like couldn't be on staff or something like that.
To be in a leadership position, you had to have immersion.
Immersion, yeah. But they would accept any kind of baptism as long as the person's happy with it. They were happy with it, so to speak.
Well, I had a guy tell me that one time in a church I was pastoring, that this subject of baptism come up and what was scriptural and what was unscriptural, and really where we were having a struggle was over baptisms coming from quote unquote Baptist churches that were practicing open communion. And if they're practicing open communion, that could just about guarantee you that they're receiving alien immersions. They seem to go hand in hand. And his comment to me was like, well, if they're happy with their baptism, that kind of thing. I'm like, no, I mean, it's not about whether they're happy with it or not. Does it meet what the scripture teaches about baptism?
Right. I think I've mentioned before about I had an uncle that was a Methodist preacher, and he had told me one time, and I'm not quite sure all the details of the story. This is back many years ago, but he told me about a guy that he knew that had gotten saved, and for some reason, like I want to say the guy was like in the jail or something, but he couldn't. Anyway, he was restricted to a certain area, and anyway, the guy had gotten saved and he couldn't get out of this place that he was in, and so he stuck his head out the window while it was raining, and was happy with that. And he would tell people that Jesus himself baptized him.
I'm not quite sure it works that way.
No.
Hey, do you remember when we was in Southeastern? There was a guy that come through there, like they normally do, have different ones at chapel. And this guy was a missionary that had done some mission work somewhere. And I forget his name. I forget where he's at, but he had some pictures and of some of his mission work, and he was showing the pictures of some of his baptisms. And it caused a big stink because some of the students got to notice in his pictures, he had them in these tubs of water or whatever, with their knees poking up out of the water, and they weren't being fully immersed. And some of the students started calling attention to it to some of the instructors. And, they was like, well, that's not baptism. But, here he was, a Baptist minister doing the best he can. And because you're doing the best you can, that's supposed to be sufficient. But, I'm not, trying to slide them for their want to be baptized, but it's got to be correct.
Right. Yeah. I don't remember that, but I'm pretty sure I might have heard of it.
Well, you was probably still a Methodist at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. You know me.
You probably saw that and said, "There's nothing wrong with that."
Nothing wrong with that. It's too much water.
Why you need so much water?
Yeah.
All right, here's a good place we can get bogged down for a minute. The Lord's Supper was usually distributed by the deacons. Clear Creek Church in Adams County served the Lord's Supper every 3 months. Sarepta Church in Franklin County also observed communion about once every 3 months, except when something unusual caused a postponement. They used real wine during that time. Bethesda Church in Hinds County recorded expenditure of $2 for a gallon of wine in 1851. They also considered it a duty for every member to partake of the Lord's Supper when not providentially hindered. Besides the Lord's Supper, foot washing was also commonly practiced. Sarepta Church's minutes in August 1846 referred to the duty of foot washing to be observed the next month in worship. Although foot washing was called a duty, only baptism and communion were referred to as orders. Now, I want to look at both of the issues in this. I want to start with that one about the Baptist churches using wine in the Lord's Supper. So I knew this, and I kind of forgot about it, but pre-Prohibition, it would have been uncommon to not use wine in basically all Protestant, and we're not Protestant, we know that, but when you begin to look up information, it lumps the Baptists together in there with it. But pre-temperance and prohibition, and you had temperance movement before you had prohibition, but it was uncommon for them to not use wine. I mean, did you know that, Rick?
I did know that. At least they use the word wine. My understanding is that the word juice is a fairly new word. And so just even wine that was unalcoholic or unfermented, the word wine would have been used because the word juice didn't come about until Welch's invented. They came up with the unfermented grape juice. And if I understand correctly, when Welch's first come out, it was referred to as Welch's unfermented wine.
Yeah. Well, the deal is though, when he says here that they used wine, he's talking about fermented wine. And so when I began to study this, they were absolutely using fermented wine, right or wrong. I'm not arguing for whether it's right or wrong. I'm just arguing for what happened. They were using it was the temperance movement in the early 1800s that then led to the 13 years of prohibition, which were a disaster because all it done was created, the illegal and the government couldn't tax it. So they realized they couldn't tax it because it was still being made and sold. Then they undone the prohibition. They get the tax revenue off the alcohol that was being made and sold and outlawed, the moonshiners or whatever.
Uh-huh.
The thing was about, so Welch, the name Welch has come from, or let me back up. Pasteurization was invented by Louis Pasteur in 1860. So we're talking about pre-Civil War. The Civil War was 1865, somewhere along in there.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as pasteurization until 1860. So what that means is you could have fresh squeezed grape juice, right? But it's only a time before fermentation begins because you don't have refrigeration. So it's going to begin, the natural yeast it's going to begin to ferment. So think in your mind, where is all these Baptist churches going to get enough fresh squeezed grape juice that's shelf stable, without pasteurization, without refrigerator, what they're using almost out of pure necessity with no other options is going to have some fermentation in it.
Yeah.
I Googled this, and the AI says that I asked the question, is it possible to keep grape juice from fermenting without pasteurization? And the answer was yes, but it's difficult. The most effective methods without pasteurization are using a preservative like potassium sorbate, filtering out microorganisms, or using very cold temperature and strong refrigeration. Well, I'm sure they didn't have very cold temperatures unless it was wintertime, or strong refrigeration. I'm not sure how what was the availability of potassium sorbate, because I don't know what that is. Without it, wild yeast on grapes will begin to ferment the juice, turning it over into alcohol over time. So if you take that into consideration, that it's almost, unless you can refrigerate it or you've got access to potassium sorbate, it just seems impossible to me to think about how you're going to have grape juice with no fermentation in it.
Yeah.
For the communion pre-pasteurization, when the natural process of what grape juice is going to go through is some fermentation. Now, I know people hate me saying that because they feel like I'm advocating using alcohol. I'm just saying I don't know what other options they had.
It was kind of more of a necessity at the time than anything. I don't know. Did you read the footnotes at the end of this article?
I didn't.
If you scroll down, it has a footnote to that. Be past all this. All right, stop. Let me see. Where's it at? I keep going. No, you might go back up. You did unpass it. Go back up. All right.
Must not be on this one. I don't see any footnotes.
No, it's on there. Just go slow so I can find it. Because I remember reading it.
This is just a reference to the.
Okay. Yeah, there it is. Number 3.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, it says grape juice that did not ferment was not invented until 1869.
Okay, so then tell me, how did you have the Lord's Supper with unfermented grape juice?
Right. That's why it was either more fresh wine or wine that, it would have had to have had some instance of at least a little fermentation when they.
Unless somebody in the church had enough, a great vineyard where you could go out and pick a whole bunch of fresh grapes every 3 months of the year and squeeze all that out to have enough. And I just that don't seem feasible to me.
Right. Yeah.
And even J.R. Graves, do you remember reading his book where he, in his in Old Landmarkism, What Is It? He contends that it's supposed to be fermented grape juice, and if it's not, then it's not biblical.
I don't remember reading it in Old Landmarkism, but I do remember reading a little bit about it in his book Intercommunion.
Probably in both of them. He says, and I don't know about fermentation. I don't, but his argument was, and I'm just saying this is what he said, and I can't prove this or disprove it. He said So the bread's supposed to be unleavened. We know that.
Uh-huh.
The Bible doesn't say the juice is supposed to be unleavened, but he says if you would assume that if the bread should have been unleavened, the juice should have been unleavened. He says it's actually the process of fermentation that removes the leaven from the juice. Now, maybe someone that's got expertise in that can speak to that, but that's what he said.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I remember because when he was getting into it, he was kind of speaking over my head when I was reading. I'll have to go back and reread exactly what it said, and maybe just slow down to kind of take in what he said. But I do remember because he was saying something about it, and I just can't remember at all what he said. But I do know I remember hearing a couple of guys talk. And these two guys, they were talking about how they make their own juice for communion at their church, and they said it wasn't fermented, but they do make it fresh, at their church, and they made the statement that they believe using store-bought grape juice was unscriptural because there was something added to it that isn't supposed to be, or that goes against the requirements for Lord's Supper. And I can't remember what their argument was, but they were saying it was unscriptural to use store-bought grape juice because of like sugar or something added to it.
Well, the articles I was reading prior to us doing this show tonight they were saying essentially that pre-temperance, so the temperance movements in the early 1800s, then you get to the prohibition is the early 1900s. But prior to that, the cultural view of alcohol was different than the cultural view in churches concerning alcohol today. And it's the temperance movement that helped change that. And so when the temperance movement, along with, then prohibition and different things happening, that's when the shift went from, maybe it was of necessity, maybe it was many other things, but the movement went from churches using fermented wine to obviously having better access through pasteurization and other things. Now that they don't have to do that, they can just go buy Welch's grape juice,
right,
that they know is not fermented and don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Anyway, regardless, they used it, right or wrong, say what you want to about it. It is what it is. The other thing, Brother Rick, in that article, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know how them liberal churches were back in 1850s.
Yeah, them liberal churches. Okay, and then it said they also considered it a duty for every member to partake of the Lord's Supper when not providentially hindered. Let me put this back up here so people can see what I'm reading here. Let me get back to where I was at. They also, where was that? They also consider the duty for every member to partake of the Lord's Supper when not providentially hindered. And then it talks about foot washing. The Lord's Supper basically every 3 months, and foot washing was not always done at the same time. A couple of things about that. Some of the old churches, would attach. Basically, what they would say is if you missed the Lord's Supper, and I don't know if it was one time or 2 times, they had people come talk to you. If you didn't come to the Lord's Supper, then you didn't participate in the business of the church. And their mindset was, and I agree with the thinking behind it, if you deem yourself unfit to partake of the Lord's Supper, what makes you fit to participate in the Lord's business? They were very serious about the Lord's Supper. And I read some of the minutes of the church that I was saved at, which goes back to 1845. And, if somebody missed the Lord's Supper, they went to visit that person, find out why they missed the Lord's Supper. And they had the Lord's Supper every 3 months and foot washing every 6 months. And so this church is in that Antebellum, Mississippi time. And the old church building had 2 doors. Women and children go in one door, sit on one side. Men go in the other door, sit on the other side. They had preaching. They had the Lord's Supper. They had feet washing. And when that church organized in 1845, two of the handful of charter members, maybe 15 or so charter members, two of them were slaves that were charter members of that church. That were members as charter members of that church. And so there you go. Just some other things that's different than what we're accustomed to today, for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Then the foot washing thing is almost unheard of today among churches. I know, of course, you came out of Faithway Landmark working, so y'all, the first church you pastored, they practiced foot washing. What y'all practiced it like with the Lord's Supper, didn't you?
Yeah, it was usually always practiced at the same time you had the Lord's Supper. And that's common in Faithway churches. The only disagreement in Faithway churches is if you do the Lord's Supper first and foot washing second, or foot washing first and Lord's Supper second. That's the dispute among Faithway churches, is what's the order of it.
Yeah, and the church I currently pastor came out of the Faithway work.
Well, they washed feet at one time then.
Yeah, they did. They were our church was Faithway, where they were founded as a Faithway church in 1936. And then when the ABA split off from the Faithway, they went the ABA route. And then when the BMA, then the BMA split off, but it wasn't until several years after the BMA that they became a BMA church. And
the Washington Association is one of the oldest associations it's one of the older associations in the state of Mississippi. It goes back. It goes way back. And now the Washington is a BMA association.
Uh-huh.
What people don't realize is people just don't know history. They don't know. They think, well, we're gonna have an old time preaching. Old time 1950, like you're talking about, not old time, just a little bit old time.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the Washington Association, they had feet washing listed in their doctrinal statement. And then that association was originally called the Old Leaf Association. It wasn't called Washington at first. And then that was in the late 1800s. But then that association split. Some churches split off and formed the Washington Association. And they split over feet washing, but they wasn't arguing against it. The Old Leaf Association just recommended it, basically.
Uh-huh.
But when the split took place, the churches that organized the Washington Association said any church that doesn't practice it cannot be a part of this association. And then later on, of course, they dropped it all together. So now none of the churches that make up the Washington even practice feet washing.
Uh-huh. And foot washing is something that if you was to ask me how to conduct a foot washing service, I have no idea. I've never been a part of one, never seen one done.
Are you even Baptist, Rick?
Looking back at these 1850 churches, I'm wondering.
I don't know, man. I tell you the truth. I pastored a church that practiced it. The second church I pastored didn't practice it. We did try one time to offer it for members, and a handful came. But trying to get people that weren't raised in that setting to practice that,
well, it ain't gonna happen.
It's almost impossible now. And I wish every church practiced it.
Uh-huh.
I didn't grow up in it, but I was saved in a church that did it. So I was introduced to it right after my salvation in that church. And I just don't know what happened that churches got away from it. I don't know, because nearly all churches, Baptist churches, I can't say all, but the majority of them, from what I read and understand, did practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what happened or the reasons why they dropped it.
And just thinking about it, we're talking about, Faithway Landmark churches practicing it, but in this article we're reading, it's Southern Baptist doing it.
Right.
And I guarantee you ain't going to find a Southern Baptist church that'll do it. You might find a BMA church or an ABA church sporadically that might do it, but I don't think you'll ever find a Southern Baptist church doing it.
No. So far, Brother Rick, what worship was like in Antebellum, Mississippi, you had fermented wine for the Lord's Supper.
Uh-huh.
You had landmark tenants. They rebaptized those that were not baptized in churches of like faith and order. You had real strict about communion every 3 months.
And I don't know if, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say something about the communion issue. I was going to say, if you noticed, it was almost too saying that it looked to be like closed communion was being practiced because they would go to the members to see why didn't you come and have the Lord's Supper. The members were expected to participate, but
it was either close or closed.
Right.
And in 1798, Rick, in 1798. There was a survey done of Baptist churches in the United States, and over 95% of Baptist churches were restricted communion.
Which is, we would call that closed, correct?
Closed. It's either going to be closed or closed, but not open. They were not open at all. They didn't practice open. And then you remember what brother, our friend in Kentucky, brother, help me out.
Ben Stratton.
Yeah, he said that he produced a document where the secretaries of the convention in each state was contacted. I think it was around 1950, 1940, something.
Like early 1900s, yeah.
And there was no churches in Mississippi, no Southern Baptist churches in Mississippi reported, according to the secretary, who would have been in the best position to know, were practicing open communion in that early 1900s. So yeah, those churches back then were either close or closed. But if you were non-Baptist, if you weren't a Baptist of a member of a Baptist church of like faith and order, you were not having communion.
No.
I'm closed, but they were at least that.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, let's see what else we got.
I was just saying you were saying about what we've noticed about how they use unfermented, or they used fermented wine. They were what was some other thing? They rejected alien baptism. So it was almost like they were landmark churches.
Sounds like it, don't it?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Music was important in Mississippi Baptist Church life. The very first entry in the minutes of Sarepta Church, 1810, said they opened by singing and prayer. The Pearl River Association mentions closing their meetings united in singing a hymn. Hezbollah, if I'm saying that right, church ordered a dozen hymn books, Dossie's Choice, for the use of the church and congregation to be paid for by voluntary contributions. It was called the Choice because it offered a choice of two types of songs. Part one contained traditional hymns such as "Oh, for 1,000 Tongues to Sing," and part two contained songs based on the Psalms of the Bible, set to rhyme, such as one based on Psalm 46, which began, "God is our refuge in distress, a present help when dangers press." So yeah, there's that. We don't sing Psalms anymore.
No, more, singing of the Psalms is done a lot in like Presbyterian churches these days.
And they're right for doing that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the Psalms were basically a hymn book for Israel.
Yeah. It goes on to say, this likely meant they ordered the Baptist Psalmody, a selection of hymns for the worship of God. This was a 794-page hymnal published in 1850 by the Southern Baptist Publication Society, edited by Southern Baptist leader Basil Manley. The practice of lining the hymn meant that a song leader chanted or sang a line of the song a cappella, and then the congregation repeated the line, and this continued through the song line by line. Boy, that would just bore some people to death.
I'm telling you.
Let's have church the old way, Brother Rick, like these folks talk all the time. Let's go back to the old-fashioned way. Well, how old you want to go? How far back you want to go? That's the question, right? I'm convicted about it oftentimes, the songs that we sing. I don't know why. There's a hymnal I bought one time that is the Psalms set to modern hymn tunes. And I would like to incorporate that in. In other words, like the tune of Amazing Grace. There's several psalms that are set to that tune. So in other words, it helps people because they're familiar with that tune. And the psalm is not King James Version word for word. It's, there's poetic license used to make it rhyme and fit. And to me, that would be a good thing to do. But man, people just, you get set in the Heavenly Highway hymnal and nothing else is scriptural. You know what I mean? And most of the songs in it are not even scriptural.
Yeah, I know. I mentioned this a few weeks back on Wednesday night in our Bible study about certain songs that we sing, like the Lily of the Valley. And we're talking about he's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star, the fairest of 10,000 of my soul. If you read that, the lily of the valley, of course, comes from the Song of Solomon. But in the Song of Solomon, the lily of the valley is referring to the woman. And there, so that would be more reference to the church rather than to the king, which would be Jesus. If you're looking at the typology that's used there.
Yeah, well, I really believe we should be trying to find some way to sing the Psalms. I'm not saying there's not good songs that's been written that can be sung, but God provided a hymnal in the Bible. And it's the Psalms, and that we don't use them anymore, to me, is a very sad thing.
I think you're right. One thing, after I read this article, one thing I noticed about it, and looking at the way their worship was conducted back then, is one thing I noticed is the simplicity of everything. I don't believe they sing some hymns out of a hymn book, and it's the Psalms were sung, and I guarantee you none of these churches had a quote professional song leader that did this. None of them had a big band, I'm sure. But yet it seems today that unless you've got somebody that just knows how to sing or knows how to, knows music or, can play an instrument, the people walk away going, that was a terrible worship service.
I know. Well, the way I understand it, a lot of these churches in that time didn't have a piano. All of it was done a cappella.
Yeah. And just goes to show you, I was talking to Anna about this today, my wife, and it seems like in a lot of churches, and I've referenced as far as preaching goes, but I think it refers to the whole service. But as far as like preaching, I think a lot of people today look at preaching as more of a form of entertainment than hearing from God.
Yeah.
And the song service, I think they look at as more of entertainment than, hey, I'm singing these songs to God. I try and encourage our church, hey, these songs that we sing, even though we might not have written them, you embrace these songs and sing them from your heart to God.
Rick, I wonder if that, I agree with you. I think that we put so much emphasis on the quality of the singing than the quality of what's being sung.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And same thing with the preaching, the quality of the presentation as opposed to the quality of what's being presented. And for a lot of people, it's entertainment value. I've been to churches before, Rick, and preached revivals where to the human ear, the singing was not great. The piano was out of tune and there was no professional singers and it didn't sound pleasant to my ears. But what does that mean? Absolutely nothing. It means nothing. But there's so many people that will label a church dead. I imagine if you were to be able to transport yourself back into these worship services, I don't know that most people today would enjoy it, but it doesn't read as though it's something that we're really even accustomed to.
No, because we're more accustomed to the whole entertainment aspect of church, quote unquote entertainment aspect.
Yeah. I wonder if you can still find that book, The Baptist Psalm, the selection of hymns for the worship of God, 794 page, published in 1850. that would be interesting to see if you could find that. I've tried to find ways to incorporate, and I failed because it's just so difficult. It's weird to people. You know what I'm talking about? It's just weird to people when you're trying to sing Psalms and they're accustomed to when we all get to heaven. It's just a weird thing to them to transition away from, not even transition away from, but incorporate the singing of the Psalms is just a difficult thing. But I think I think it needs to be, it ought to be done.
I think you're right. I'm trying to find it right now. I'm seeing, let's see this. I think I might have found it. I'm not sure what that. I'll have to look it up and when I get some free time and see. I thought I might be able just to find it. I did see some online stuff from it though. I don't know about ordering an actual book.
Well, the hymnal I ordered, Rick, was it's the Psalms, and I forget the name of it, but I'm pretty sure that it was published by a Presbyterian group. And people are going to say, oh, my gosh, I can't believe that. Well, they didn't write the hymns, okay? They just took the Psalms and put them to modern hymn tunes.
Yeah.
You know, what a friend we have in Jesus. We know that tune. Now there's a psalm that goes with that tune. So that's what they did. And I wish that I could figure out how to get that incorporated into modern worship service without making people feel like you're trying to be a Presbyterian or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And the thing about that though is a lot of the psalms or a lot of the songs that we have in our hymn books. I mean, how many songs are in your hymn book that was written by Bill and Gloria Gaither?
They weren't written by Baptists. They were written by a lot of them charismatics.
Yeah. What a mighty fortress is our God was written by Martin Luther. We got psalms that were written by Charles Wesley. Hey,
I had a guy one time tell me, Rick, in church, and it was surrounding this issue of Calvinism, right? And he says to me, we don't need to use anything in church that is associated with, written by, Calvinism. And I understand where he was coming from, but he don't know what he's saying, right? What are you going to do with Amazing Grace? What are you going to do with these songs that, without a doubt, history simply records were written by Calvinists?
Yeah.
You gonna throw it? He didn't want to hear that. I'm like, dude, you got to be reasonable about what you're saying. You know what I mean? They don't understand much of what we say.
Yeah. Now I would say do this: examine the song itself, not necessarily who wrote it, but the song, and if it's a scriptural
nothing wrong
song,
with Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you. Look at the content of the song.
Because
there's a lot of them that need to be torn out and thrown away.
Because I mean, I don't know, and I'm not, I'm just ignorant on music anyway. But I mean, what songs are out there that were written by Baptists?
I don't know. I have no idea. I just what you got to do is look at the word. But here's the thing: you can't, even the best hymn that you could find, if you could determine it was written by a good old-fashioned missionary Baptist, it had great content, great doctrine, it still don't compare to the Psalms. The Psalms written by God.
You're right. Yeah.
We don't use them.
No.
Well,
and of course, a lot of some of the Psalms that I have heard put to music were and I'm not saying all of them, but I know when I was younger, working in with volunteering with youth ministry, some of the what were maybe you'd call modern praise songs in the early 2000s were psalms put to music. That song, as the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after you.
Yeah.
I remember singing that song in youth group when I was working with youth, and that's a song, but it was a contemporary quote unquote worship song. Yeah,
I know. But the thing was, when after the Lord's Supper, they sung a hymn. Well, that was a psalm.
Yeah.
That was a psalm that they sang. Now, most churches today sing Amazing Grace or Till We Meet Again or whatever the case may be.
Must be the tide or something like that. Yeah.
So the early church was singing the psalms. If they were singing, they were singing psalms. Okay, that's what they were singing. And we want to not pretend we're the original Christians, except in many cases we're not doing what the original Christians were doing.
You're right, and even Paul, he wrote about in Ephesians and Colossians about edification to each other using psalms and hymns and spiritual songs.
Yeah.
So you got to have all three of them, I think.
Yeah. Well, I believe there's room for other sources of music you can use in church that God has helped people to write that are spiritual, that are doctrine. I'm not saying that it has to exclusively be the Psalms. I'm just saying there should be a place for them in the worship.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because think of it this way, Rick. There's a lot of songs that I could sing without ever opening that hymnal up. I couldn't even, probably a lot of songs I could sing every word and never look at a hymnal. And the reason I can is because of repetition throughout my life and church life. Well, what if it was using the Psalms doing that? How much scripture could you quote if you were using the Psalms in worship? You could quote an enormous amount of scripture just by virtue of repetition, them words. Oh, and through that process, how much more Bible would be in our heart if we used the Psalms that God wrote, maybe not as opposed to, but as a part of the worship. It's all kind of benefits to it. We just don't do it.
Yeah, we don't do it. Excuse me. Like if I teach on Psalm 119, I tell them, hey, this song was written where each stanza begins with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And I said it was probably used as a teaching device to teach children the alphabet, just like we have the ABC song. But at the same time, they're not just learning the alphabet, they're learning truths about God's word.
Yeah. What about catechisms? Catholics not the only ones that use catechisms.
Yeah, I know. Charles Spurgeon wrote a catechism.
I know. I know.
But catechisms, and there are some Southern Baptist catechisms, I know, but a majority of Baptists that use catechisms, I think a lot of churches don't use them because of the stigma of Reformed theology. Because a lot of your Reformed people do that. But I'll say this: look, I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not Reformed in any shape of the way. But I will say this: they cherish the Word of God.
Yeah,
and they know how to teach it and to teach it to their kids and their churches.
Yeah, we've got to this place that if somebody else does it, whether it's right or wrong, I can't do it because they do it. That's the stupidest thing ever.
Yeah.
We rob ourselves of some great benefits and blessings because, I don't want to be associated with that. Therefore, we can't do that when that thing obviously has value, right? It's a teaching tool, right? It's question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And even the Psalms, like, the song service that's the Presbyterians do. Well, maybe they're right about a few things.
Right.
I mean, I'm no Presbyterian, but it don't mean that they're wrong on every point of doctrine, right?
Right.
So, I'm with you on some of that.
Yeah, I had one of my favorite preachers to listen to. He just passed not too long ago, but was John MacArthur. And like I said, I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not Reformed, but John MacArthur to me was one of the best Bible teachers out there. And I didn't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but I admired his teaching and his stance on the Word of God. And I was told by somebody that if I didn't stop posting something by John MacArthur, that I was going to be put in the Reformed camp. So,
Yeah. Well,
but but like you said, we're so afraid of being labeled this and that we throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I know it. I know it. Yeah, I don't know of any churches that are using the Psalms, and we're not where I pastor, Rick. I'm not throwing stones.
Right,
I wish I could, and maybe I can. Maybe I can start incorporating it. One of the things I did when I was pastoring my first church that I found value in was about halfway through my 10 years there, or some point in it. I started as part of the worship was we would take every month a portion of scripture, and we had it wasn't responsive reading where I say it, then they say we read it together as part of the worship service. And the whole purpose of that was, again, repetition, reading the scripture, the same scripture, every service for an amount of time, helping, to for memorization.
Yeah, I would the previous church I was at, and I haven't done it where I'm at now, and I've been thinking about starting it. But I would open up our worship services just reading scripture.
Yeah.
It might, just maybe a psalm, like just read Psalm 1, and then next week read Psalm 2. And then, of course, when I preach, it'd be, maybe I'd preach a book of the Bible or something.
Brother, who was Dr. Holmes, Charlie Holmes? I went to a seminar that the Antebellum Mississippi put on it was about preaching. You might have been there. Was you there, Rick?
I remember going to something he did. I think I was there. Was that at Big Creek?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there.
And he has talked about one of the things that he does or recommends doing is whatever text you're going to be preaching from, you start that service off by having them turn and read that text. Just read the text. Don't preach it. Don't elaborate. Don't add any commentary. You just read the text. So that text is on their mind. Their Bible's already open to it, so that when you begin to preach, you've already established where we're going to be in this worship service. It's just another way to exalt, I guess, the word in preaching. But I think you got to do it through Psalm. I'm not one of these that's big about contemporary music. I got a lot of issues with these groups that go around. I think God gives us talent to be used in, first off, in the church that we're a member of. And I don't see how these folks is making all this, and not every group's making. A lot of groups I know just go love offers. They're not doing it for money. But at the same time, it requires them to be absent from the church they're a member at, using those talents in their church quite a bit. Mm-hmm. I have a problem with that. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm ignorant. But I do. I think that if God gives you those talents to play, it should be used in that church that you're a member. That's me.
That's one thing I like about the group Casting Crowns.
I don't like anything about them. What was you gonna say?
I was gonna say that they make a point. They don't do any concerts on Sundays because they work with the youth and music at their home church in, I think, Georgia, and so they make sure they're at their church on Sundays.
I will give them credit for that then, because I think that's the way it should be. Churches did not meet on Sundays when there was no preaching. However, many people would go to other churches where the church would have. Okay, that's a question we asked earlier.
Yeah,
and I was curious about that. So, according to this person, when they had preaching one Sunday, they didn't meet on those Sundays, but would go to other churches where. Okay, well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've talked about, Rick, whether it was not right or wrong, was that a necessity or what, pre-prohibition, Civil War, Antebellum, Mississippi was using fermented wine for the Lord's Supper. They practiced, that was every 3 months typically. Foot washing was mixed in there somewhere. What else did we talk about? The Lord's Supper was restricted baptism. They rejected alien immersions. We talked about singing of the Psalms. What else? Here we go. Many Baptists, they were go ahead.
I was just going to say that they, most of them just met once a month.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Mississippi Baptists were a praying people. Church ministers frequently made mention of prayer meetings and times of fasting and prayer. Ebenezer Church in Amite County met on Monday in 1846 to fast and pray to the Lord that he would send more faithful laborers into his harvest and call their pastor. 1847, Ebenezer Church met on a Friday to fast and pray for the peace and prosperity of the churches. Throughout the 1840s, it was the practice of Hephzibah Church in Clark County to meet for an hour of prayer before having their Sunday worship service. Well, what a difference that might make.
I'm telling you.
Prayer meetings.
You know what's crazy about that? They would meet on a Friday to have these prayer meetings.
Well, that's because there wasn't Friday Night Lights going on, Rick.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's, I don't know about your church, but our church, it's hard to get people to come out on a Wednesday night for prayer meeting.
That ain't just at your church, Rick. I don't know. It seemed like I read somewhere that, midweek services started out during one of the wars, people getting together to pray. It was called prayer meeting.
Uh-huh.
And then it stuck. And, we may refer to it as prayer meeting or Bible study or whatever, midweek services. It is hard to get folks out. And I understand some of that is. Some people with their work schedules, it's hard to get home and you got school. And I know it's harder for some than others. But I do feel more could be there than what are there.
I think you're right, yeah.
All right, here we go. The last little bit of this article.
That's the good part.
Yeah, some practices that were commonly accepted that then would be considered unusual today. For example, it was normal for Baptists to chew tobacco while sitting in worship. In fact, in 1850, Bethesda Church in Hinds County. Now listen, I don't know how big this church was. Okay, but if there was 71 spit boxes needed, there was 71 of their members was spitting, and so that probably was a pretty good sized church. But it was normal for Baptists to chew tobacco while sitting in worship. In fact, in 1850, Bethesda Church in Hinds County voted to put 71 spit boxes in their meeting house at a cost of 3 cents each. Can you imagine seeing 71 Spittoons around the pews of the church, and just while you're sitting there preaching, getting that old Spittoon over there?
I'm telling you, that would be a sight. I brought this up to a church member today at lunch, and he told me that he was told, like, back in the day, they would open windows here at the church. And people would spit out the windows, yeah.
All right, I'm ready to go back to the old-timey way, Brother Rick. When you get up and preach about them old-time worship service, we're going to get back to that's it, huh?
That's what we're doing. I'm bringing it up in our business meeting to get some spit boxes put in the church.
Yeah.
I know I got a few church members that would appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the same thing. But like I've seen, even today, I've seen churches that not so much inside the sanctuary, we're not at all, but outside the church building will be these big erected kind of decorative ashtrays. Where workers would put their cigarettes out before they go in the sanctuary. There's some of that right around here local.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that.
Well,
but I have seen just people throw cigarette butts out in the parking lot a few times.
That's probably why they put them there. They got tired of folks just sticking them out in the parking lot.
Yeah, they got tired of having to pick them up.
Yeah. So let me recap here. If you take the good with the bad, Rick, there's always the good and there's always the bad. There are some things that these churches ought to be commended, I think, for. Right?
Yeah.
They ought to be commended for their, I believe, the way that they prayed.
Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second.
I'll give you about 2 seconds. Rick's got to go spit. He forgot to bring his spittoon with him in the building. But anyway, these churches has got some things to be commended for and some things that obviously we would question. But you think back about the thing, and let me talk about the things that we would commend them for, Rick, right?
All right.
praying, their practice of meeting and prayer and fasting for various things. I would commend them for the use of Psalms in their worship service. I would commend them for their stance on alien immersion and their baptism. What else? What else, Rick? Would you, in that thing, all that we've read, would you feel would be a commendation?
I would agree with all of those. I couldn't think of just given what we read about. That's the only thing I could think of to commend them on.
Yeah. I would commend them even, Rick. I would just say this. I don't know how you feel about it. I don't know if it's something you studied out, something that you're just kind of neutral on, but I really, in my heart of hearts, feel like the scripture teaches that churches ought to be practicing the feet washing. I just, I know where I'm pastoring now don't, and I'm not saying that that practice is going to, that the validity of a church depends upon that. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I'm saying it's beneficial and ought to be doing it. And I just don't know how that I know what people say, well, just teach. And I understand that. But it is difficult, though, for folks who weren't raised up in that setting to incorporate that practice in. I just think it's valuable and ought to be. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, my thought on it, I guess I'm neutral on it. I'm not, like I said, I've never been a part of a church that has practiced it. But if I went to a church, in fact, if the church I'm at now, if they wanted to start it back up, I wouldn't have a problem doing it. But it's one of those things I wouldn't look at as being necessary for the validity of a church.
Yeah, no, me neither. Just amazing to me how here it is, 2025, and we just think things have always been the way they are.
Yeah.
But it's not the case. I'm not saying the doctrine per se has changed, but the practices are not always exactly the same as they've always been.
Yeah, I know. People talking about we're a traditional church. Well, how traditional are we? Well, we don't have spittoons in the church house. We can't be too traditional. If you want to look at it like that.
Got to get them spittoons on.
Yeah.
I've done something. I don't know what I did.
You do.
Got to clear this off so I can exit this out. There we go. Anyway, all right. Well, that's our recap of an article. Baptist churches, worship in Baptist churches in Antebellum, Mississippi. A lot to learn there. A lot of things that you might be surprised by if you could just be transported back and see what was going on. I guess some things we can.
Yeah, I was just going to say the one thing I took away from is just the simplicity of church. Today we make church so complicated, and we just need singing and we need preaching.
Yeah, you go through the whole thing of you get their devotion, Sunday school, singing, offering, preaching, Sunday night, Wednesday night, WMA, men's meeting, deacons, finances, parts. It's just some of that stuff don't have to be.
No. And I'm not putting this down, but I love youth ministry and things of that nature, but I guarantee you they didn't have youth ministry like we at least not like we think of today.
No.
Or any other something that we've complicated, and just simple worship.
All right, Rick. Well, I think we've about hit our time up, so we better get off here.
All right. Yep. You got work in the morning.
I'm gonna go see if I can find a place to order about 20 Spittoons. And
I am too. You get a price on the Spittoons. I'll get a price on those psalmodies, and we'll share them amongst churches.
We'll swap back and forth.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, you ready to get out of here?
I'm ready when you are.
We gone.